IVM.
Hey, welcome to Shunya One, episode 37. Today we're speaking to Samidha Sharma, and we are going to talk about some very interesting things about her covering the startup life.
Yeah, she's been doing this for a while.
Yes, and it's pretty much all the stuff she's seen on the rise of what has happened over the startup scene.
She's seen, we talked to her about like the entire rise of the mobile and all that kind of stuff. So it's like,
Yep.
Great,
and
great
of course comparing how Silicon Valley operates and how she's seen India and, let's say, Powai Valley operate.
Powai Valley, that's right, yes.
And of course, rounding that up with also her viewpoints on women in tech and how there aren't any.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
I think,
all right, let's jump in. Before that, what's happening on our Slack channel?
Sure. So I came across an interesting article just randomly on my travels over the internet about how Chrome is turning into the new Internet Explorer 6, and we got a couple of responses to that. So Arpit was talking about that, and basically his response to that was, my primary browser is not Chrome, but I do find myself using it 2-3 times a week for something which doesn't work well on my default, plus the overall experience sometimes varies vastly when you come into Chrome from some websites. And the way Chrome sucks up the battery and its no memory is free memory policy annoys me a lot.
Yeah, man. Chrome has been like the one thing which I can't quit. It's like a love-hate relationship.
It really is, isn't it, man? I mean, like, it uses so much resource in the system just generally.
I upgraded my MacBook because of it.
Okay. But I mean, like,
just to open more tabs.
But this really is kind of sort of a problem, right? I mean, like, it's the same problem that we had with IE, where sites were being is kind of sort of a problem, right? I mean, like, it's the same problem that we had with IE, where sites were being made as IE first websites, right? Mm-hmm. And we're seeing the same thing happen with Chrome, where sites are being made as Chrome first websites, so you don't have a choice but to play with Chrome.
I mean, by the way, it's an OS also officially now with the Chromebook and so on.
True enough. But I mean, like, for Gmail and stuff like that, the experience on Chrome is so far superior than it is on other things. That I mean, like, for Calendar, Google Calendar as well. Yep. So I mean, like, it's really kind of a not so great situation where, again, we're getting out of our standards compliant kind of world and moving back into a proprietary world.
Yeah, so I actually think of it more like an OS rather than anything else, right? It's saying that, hey, some apps are tuned for Android, some apps are tuned for iOS.
Then it's a browser, right? I mean, like, it is a browser. So then, I mean, like, at that point, you're not able to access
losing the definition of it being a browser.
If Firefox and IE can't play in the same space, or Edge can't play in the same space, then Chrome is essentially going to become its own monopoly. And it already, I mean, like, it's never like, it's not at IE levels, right? IE was like 90% plus, but it's still like 65%. And most techies use Chrome.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, and that's part of the problem, right? I mean, like, if people like us use Chrome, when we're going to start developing stuff, we're going to develop first on Chrome. And that's just kind of the big problem here.
Yep. It's the Google takeover.
Yeah. But anyway, those were our thoughts. Please continue to send us some stuff on the Slack channel.
Yep.
And shall we
jump into the show?
Let's get into the episode.
All right. So today we have Samidha Sharma, the emerging business editor at Times of India. Well, a lot of people here listening might already know her because she specifically focuses on covering startups, entrepreneurship, and of course, what's happening in the VC space. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shiladitya. We've been trying to do this for a really long time, so good start to the year.
Yes.
I guess, am I the first journalist on your podcast?
I think so.
Maybe Girish might kind of play that line a little bit.
But tech startup journalist for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
But I think, like proper journalism background person, mainstream media, yes, definitely.
Okay, glad.
Yeah, that's why you've been so tough to get.
No, and the funny thing is, like,
there's
I was
always
mentioning,
breaking news.
This is my perpetual fear about, like, committing myself, in the evening, but we're doing this, so glad I'm here. And I guess, I'm donning a different hat, but we were discussing some of the questions. Just to give a quick sort of snapshot, I've been doing journalism for about 10 years, actually a little more than that. Always been a business journalist, but jumped, totally into like tech and startups sometime in like 11, 12, very early days. The Let's Buy and the Urban Touch folks were around. Yeah, I just feel very old now. But I think everyone associates with startups only. I think that sort of began in 14, 15 when the bulk of the
That's
money
when
started.
everyone knew what the word meant. Before
Yeah.
that, it was like, no, these kids are just doing something.
Doing things.
Yeah. So I started off doing like multiple things at the Economic Times in 2006, but I never found that kind of passion which I did when I started covering internet and e-commerce and startups, and there was no going back after that. I think it's just one of those things, right? A lot of investors would also say, or founders, when you do tech and startup, everything else looks very staid. I don't know, maybe I feel that way. Not everyone does. But everything seemed very slow. Like, I used to do retail, like brick and mortar. That's how I started doing online commerce, because it was sort of emerging in 2010, 11. And I could never I can't think of going back and doing only that.
Right.
Because you're used to just meeting so many new companies, founders, the kind of ideas that you exchange. It doesn't, I don't know. For me, this was kind of the thing which just excited me so much that ever since then I've just been doing this space. Yeah.
And what was it like then? Since obviously, being on the inside, you see a lot of, when you meet founders, you see their passion and they talk about it. And even in those early days, of course, there were fewer of them, but the passion was still the same, which is why it grew out. But how was it from a coverage point of view to obviously what we saw when, hit the mainstream, like you said, 14, 15? Like, how was it in those days?
Very different. In fact, I tell a lot of people that you literally had to, that awareness had to be, was on you to spread in the newsroom that, this is important and why it is important. So I remember this one time, Myntra had raised some 20 odd million from Accel and Tiger. So Accel and Tiger were really the sort of big investors in e-commerce back then as well. And I remember Mukesh Bansal was like, he was just trying to stop me from writing that story, which was so unlike 14 and 15, where people would leak stories, And I still have, I don't know, I've changed so many phones after that. I don't have that message. I keep telling Mukesh even now, he told me that, you're doing a disservice, Samidha, to your publication if you're going to put this out because it's not correct. And I was fighting so much with Mukesh to put this out, and all it got was a single column, space in the Times of India business section. And I laugh over it now that, people were like, okay, Myntra, so what? Like, who's buying, in 2012? And you had to tell, people who were sort of deciding, editors, that, this will become big. It's not now, but you are doing this to kind of, take a step ahead over other publications and cover them right now when they're in their, mid. They're not really big companies. They are getting there.
Right.
So it's a lot about spotting those early on and getting a hold on those companies. And it was far tougher in 2011-12 than in 14-15, where like front pages were like splashed with like some
I think at one point in 15 there was definitely, I think every day front page had something.
Yeah.
Every day front page had tech or startups news or something related to the industry.
There was a time when that was like, you're right. I mean, like that was the point of conversation at everything you went to. My friends are not tech people in any way whatsoever, but every time you go, hey, what about this? Hey, what about this? Hey, do you hear about this?
Yeah.
I mean, like, do you think that Amazon and Flipkart valuations make sense? I'm like, dude, what are you asking me this question for?
Yeah. So I think 14-15 really kind of made startups very mainstream. Like, people were telling me that I remember one VC telling me in 2015 that now my parents really know what I do. Before that they'd be like, are you in a bank? Do you lend? Like, what do you do?
Oh, wow! I can't imagine a VC having that problem.
Yeah.
Usually the founder was okay.
No, that too. I remember when we first wrote the big funding round in Grofers. I remember Albinder messaging that morning and saying, now my in-laws know what I do. Otherwise otherwise they would just think I'm going around selling vegetables or I don't know what is happening. So I think it really got the whole startup sort of ecosystem into the mainstream, and it was good and bad, like we know the repercussions and the fallouts of 14-15, which we saw later, but it did push it into the center stage. So that was very, very different from 11-12, when you really had to kind of hustle to get stories in the paper.
Right. But on the media side, right, since you were in the newsroom when all of this stuff was happening, that transition was basically just because of more and more money. I mean, as the story sort of reflected, was that the main anchor for why this is relevant, or what was it really?
No, I think money was a very, very important part. And that's something that I tell a lot of people who say, why do you guys write so many funding stories? And internally also, there's a lot of discussion because it became too much in 14-15. I think it was a huge, I think people saw those numbers, and even, someone like Amit was mentioning, people who were not even connected to this space thought, there were a lot of misconceptions also. Right. I remember someone walked up to me once and said, so when a fund is raising $1 billion, that money is going to the partners, no? Like people thought that money is like theirs.
Yeah,
like they have $1 billion, or like if say X company is raising 20 million, it's going to the founders. So a lot of people had a lot of misconception, and that is the reason a lot of people who were not really meant for this space jumped into it, thinking, oh, everyone's going to become like rich and famous.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was a big crowd puller, and maybe a lot of wrong sort of people also came in, because it was about the money. But also I think entrepreneurship, I think around 14 also got this, from 14-15 became mainstream because the government also started doing it. And this is the first time, right? The whole Startup India and things like that.
Right. There was a lot of legitimacy given to the whole buzzword of startups, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So it meant a lot more than it did a few years before.
So I think multiple things. I would say the kind of money that flowed in, the coverage, like I said, in 11-12, nobody was writing about it much. I remember even Flipkart had just started to kind of become big, and then you remember in 2012 they were kind of out of money when the GA round fell through and it didn't happen. Then there was a really bad phase of e-commerce, between 12 and 13. Snapdeal couldn't raise, and so all those things were happening, but there was not too much of media glare that time. But vis-a-vis 14-15, when anything good or bad became it was a bit exaggerated.
And that's when I think I wanted to check and ask you this. You coined the term Powai Valley, which has come up in earlier conversations.
I know. And, Zishan, yes.
And we of course know how Powai Valley rose and fell. What's your take on that? How was watching all of that happen?
So in 13 is when, I first sort of got there, because I was hearing from people that, there's a really sound sort of ecosystem that can be built around Powai because of IIT Bombay. And I visited, and I think Zishan spoke about it. I walked into his apartment. I think he just come back from New York at that time, or London, one of the two places. And it was looking like a perfect ecosystem, because people, and when I wrote about it, the whole analogy was drawn how Stanford was to Silicon Valley is what IIT Bombay would be to Powai. But I think it just grew too big too soon, is my assessment. There were no perfect, there weren't the best role models, and I don't think there can be a resurgence till we see 2 or 3 really big, sound and sustainable sort of companies coming out of Powai. I think it just heated up. It actually was emblematic of what happened in 14-15. It was the same sentiments. I walked in, and I remember I walk into the tiny owl office, and they're not even, I think they just raised a Series A, or I think it wasn't even that. And they had such a swanky office. And I remember telling Harsh, dude, this is just reminding me of housing, and it didn't take too long, right?
Yeah. One by one, everything sort of folded into
what
that.
happened is housing became a role model, which itself was like a train wreck,
Yeah. Rather, the way they executed was right. I mean, they were a brilliant product was great, and all of that. There were some really good parts to it. Yeah. But the way they grew, I think they mismanaged that growth.
Exactly.
And that became what people aspired for instead
of... So I think it wasn't only specific to housing or Tiny Owl. I think everyone became too celebratory about startups before they had done anything, and including the media, like all of us. I mean, I don't think it's just one stakeholder in the ecosystem. It was everyone, and people started celebrating before there was any big success.
Right.
So I think Powai was exactly that. And I mean, right now it's quiet, and I think now actually maybe some good stuff will come out of there.
Yeah. Because IIT is not gone anywhere.
Yeah, it's not gone. Yeah, the
smart
feeder.
Kids are still.
Yeah, that typically what happens, right? I mean, like, there's a bubble bursts, and then after that you start seeing real things kind of come out of that.
Yeah.
From that destruction, you get creation.
Yeah.
You'll definitely start.
And also, since you mentioned that the fact about stable companies, right? I think Silicon Valley and Stanford and all those areas always had the previous generation of startups like Apple or all those other companies.
HP, the first, right?
Exactly. Yeah. They actually started it. They went through a lean phase and they still grew at their regular pace, but they were the anchors, I guess, in that region, right? So I think we hopefully should see some.
Yeah. So our first generation is really... if you take into account Make My Trip and InfoEdge, etc., which I don't know. I mean, they're not really the tech companies that we started seeing. So our first vintage really would be 9, 10 or thereabouts.
Yeah, the
Flipkart 2007, right? So maybe these companies, once they do have like big IPOs or there are some really successful outcomes, I think they create that whole ecosystem for newer companies to kind of... And most of the companies, I mean, housing included, they all were looking up to Flipkart, in terms of role models. So I think more need to be coming out of our, ecosystem for younger companies to sort of, make them, have some role models to sort of look up to. Yeah.
Correct. In fact,
that's sorry. Isn't that a little tough in like the Indian context? Because right now, what you're seeing is that generally fundraising is outstripping revenue, right? So I mean, like, are you really going to see those kinds of big outcomes? I don't know if that will ever happen. Because even though it's a lot cooler than it was 3 years ago, right?
Yeah.
You still do definitely see that. I mean, like, fundraising is outstripping revenue in terms of like, a company that's raising money is trying to do more than what they are doing. So, I mean, like, I don't know if outcomes are something that are going to happen like in the very short term.
But they'll happen at some point.
So,
but I think outcomes will happen. It'll just be far smaller in size than what everyone expected them to be. I think for India, good exits would be $200 to $300 million dollars, instead of everyone in 14-15 thought they were just doing... Nobody was talking anything less than a unicorn, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think the market was at all ready for everyone to think that they would be the next $1 billion company. Yeah. So I think that whole recalibration and resetting of expectations from the market is starting to happen. But like Amit said, there's just too much money which has gone in. So you can't have raised 1 billion and expect an outcome of 300 million. Then, it's disaster. I mean, it's going to be like what Snapdeal,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know how it will correct. But the money which has already sort of gone into these companies, they would definitely have to have better exits than 300 million. I mean, at least for the new ones, they know that, hopefully they will not go down the same path.
Yeah, and I mean, I think also there's been an evolution in terms of, what is the number one expense on all of this stuff? It's mostly marketing, right? That's the number one expense in most of these kind of large raises. Yeah. And I think there is an understanding that, you can, the one-size-fits-all marketing approach is not really working anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think that you will definitely, for the companies that come forward, that will definitely be there.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, it might be a controversial question, but I remember during 14-15, the most people who made money were actually newspapers.
Really? Okay,
Because
just to
every-
clarify, journalists don't get any cuts from any of those. So, I remember, actually now I remember, because I used to be in Bangalore like every second week, and this was the time when the huge 1 billion fundraise for Flipkart happened, and it was seminal, right? And things just went crazy after that.
Right.
Those were the times when, we had, I think we still do, some 8 pages to get to the front page, of ads.
Yeah.
And people are like calling me, dude, it's tough to even find like where your page one is. I'm like, I'm not making any money. My money is fixed salary. It does not depend on the amount of ads that are in the paper. So, in fact, lots of random conspiracy theories, like, oh, people are covering it more because they're getting ads from e-commerce. I'm like, dude, that's not right.
Yeah.
Every sector, has these phases. So there was FMCG at some point, and they were the ones advertising because, like Amit said, they had the money.
Yeah, it's complementary also.
I mean, if you
And
are...
also, you advertise to get attention, right? And I mean, like, if you're getting attention, you're going to come in the view of the press as well, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to give you attention.
No, and it's got nothing to do with like you cover this space, because it's actually the other way around. I mean, you start covering it much before they hit the papers with, their ads.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it happened with telecom. It's happened with any space which is kind of had this boom period, and which was the same with startups. It's back to normal. It doesn't mean that people have, ET still has one page on startups and tech. So you don't just take a call, oh, now we're not getting ads, so we'll remove the page. I mean, come on.
No, of course, it wasn't that. But yes, I mean, that was a lot of the... I mean, marketing was where all the VC money went, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was a huge part of... And see, that's what led to the blind spending also.
Exactly.
A lot of it was not calculated
There's
enough.
that old marketing saying now that I know that half of it works, I just don't know which half. So I mean, like, that is.
Yeah, but I think that's true for only really e-commerce and maybe I don't know.
I think
I mean,
that's true for a lot of them, right? I mean, you look at all the food tech people. Even
Yeah.
back then, they were spending a lot of money on advertising.
That typically happens when you have two really well-funded players in a market, and food tech is again sort of seeing that kind of craziness.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, let's see. There are not too many of these big spaces in India, at least right now, which will see that kind of...
I think we saw it we saw it with the personal services space. We saw it,
Well, at least, and by the way, today in food tech's defense, I would say at least it's a sector which has still survived.
That is true.
Yeah, exactly. Who knew?
Not just survived,
who
it's
knew?
actually thrived. I mean, so I was looking at my Scootsie order list, right? And I've ordered food from Scootsie in the last month 22 times. I mean, that's kind of insane.
Okay. You're probably there, MAU.
That's ridiculous, right? I mean, like, every time you go to somebody's house in the night, it's like, okay, let's order some food.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, from that sense, I mean, like, they've done really well.
No, and it's growing at a really fast clip.
Yeah.
I think, and repeat orders are just sort of going up.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Swiggy is seeing that.
So once you find this as a thing to do, this becomes the best way to do it, right? I mean, like, it's a fairly natural...
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, in 2015, when Tiny Owl shut down, and just there was complete doomsday written all over, right?
Yeah.
And then this has been the resurgence of sort of
It's all about the over enthusiasm and expectations were set a little too high.
Yeah.
It's not that they were unfounded.
Yeah.
Right.
It just needed more time, and we still need more time, I guess.
Yeah, and the valuations are still, I think, a bit,
Frothy.
frothy. I think that needs to still sort of settle in at some level, which is more sort of moderate. But I think a lot of that depends on founders and the kind of investors. So.
Again, I mean, like, I don't know about that, right? I mean, to me, it's like value is whatever someone's willing to pay. Right, so I mean, like, what are the methods for creating those valuations and stuff like that? That's also, at this point, there's no real kind of, there are supposedly 9 methods for figuring out your valuation, right? You pick whatever you want to based on how you want to justify it to
No,
whoever
but
you're talking to.
I'm mentioning valuation because the delivery space is always good for the consumer.
Right.
who gets really affected are the companies and the investors in those companies, because the more users you're getting, you're actually spending more
money,
and you're losing more. So I think people have rationalized and trying to optimize on the whole delivery front, and with cloud kitchens and things like that.
And similarly other stuff like fintech and all of that.
All of them are.
So they're all relevant. It's just that they were a little overvalued and expectations of growth were too high.
I'm trying to remember where I heard this, but I was listening to some podcast or the other, a couple of, like in the last week or so, and they were talking about like all the stuff that failed in the 90s, right? In the first dot-com crash.
Yeah.
All of that stuff, basically, all those ideas have come back.
Yeah.
It's not like those ideas have died.
WebWan is a big example. And then Instacart Sequoia burnt their hands completely on WebWan, and they went and, backed Instacart again, and it was Mike Moritz both the times.
No, because the ideas are solid, right? The problem was that there was not enough internet, there was not enough infrastructure, all those things.
No, and in fact, when I mentioned Let's Buy and Urban Touch, I mean, these were just a little before time. Urban Touch is what Nykaa is doing right now, Yes. Let's Buy was doing electronics, which is what Flipkart did. I mean, when they bought Let's Buy. So these ideas weren't bad. It was just that they weren't timed very well. So
they were early on their rise.
Yeah.
But wow, okay, so there's so much of conversation around this we can have. I think we should take a quick break and come back and talk some more.
Over 47% of online users in India have experienced harassment at some point. So if it's two of us inside this recording studio, chances are pretty high that one of us has faced abuse at some point. How do we tackle this? What do we need to do better? Come, let's learn together. Join me on Akanksha Against Harassment at IVM Podcasts every Thursday. Let's learn how to make online a safe place together.
Hey, so welcome back, and jumping back into this conversation about how expectations were sort of set a little too high maybe, and how we go through this bubble, right? I think that's another word which keeps coming back in all our conversations with other founders here as well. How do you, again, as this relationship between founders and the media, and then you as a media obviously have there's a VC interest, so everyone has a sort of self-interest in making themselves look great all the time, and keeping this whole ecosystem nice, and glossy, and So how do you handle that, and how do you think people are people a little more mature now post this whole bubble bursting?
No, I don't think so.
No, pretty straight.
No, I mean, I know I cannot, quote specific anecdotes and things like that, but it's really tough to do my job. Let's put it like this, okay? Because people really, and I tell most people, who want to do journalism, that have this one motto that you cannot keep everyone happy. Because that's not your job, that's not what you're mandated to sort of do. And but that is what people expect, right? And especially companies which are young, founders who are haven't really dealt with the media. And I mean, I've seen so many of them, they get very personal, and they think that, you're putting this story out because of some reason. And I'm like, no, this is just a story for me. I know it is your company. And then they try and tell you that, this is just a story for you, Samidha, but this is like my company. And I'm like, but I'm just doing my job. So there are very few founders. Investors are, equally they're too politically correct. I mean, just recently I went around asking VCs to kind of pick their pick for 2017. Nobody wanted to give that out, Nobody.
It's like, I can't go on record with this.
Yeah, and I'm like, how does it matter? But you see it, you see it all around you. And that's a very VC trait. I think it's not India specific. But it's just very guarded, and this space is also very incestuous, in that way. So people just expect you that if you're their friend, you will be their friend as a journalist also, but it doesn't work like that, I have a job to do. There are few people who tell me, we won't stop you from writing. I know you've got to do what you have to do.
Right.
But there are very few like that. People hold grudges. People want you to not offend them. People, obviously, I mean, if you do a takedown on anyone, they're not going to tell you, oh, let's come meet for a drink,
Wow.
Yeah, it doesn't happen. And it's very, very difficult to have them have them talk to you, as if nothing had happened. It's very, very difficult. And I think as a journalist, you're just grappling with this every day in and day out.
Yeah.
And still do what you have to do, and keeping your sources and everyone.
Exactly, it's a matter of, I think you were mentioning earlier, it's a matter of trust, right?
Yeah.
So someone will feel that, oh, you've broken our trust.
Yeah,
and then
I've had a lot of people who've, they do not spoken to me, but I feel that they are not the happiest, which is okay, right?
Yeah.
cold
Yeah.
vibes.
Yeah.
Sometimes people just don't. You're right. Taking it personally is a good way to put it, right?
Yeah.
People don't realize that this is just, you have to be able to deal with this stuff. If you want to grow your company,
Yeah.
you're not always going to get glowing coverage over every single thing that you do.
Exactly.
Sometimes it'll be like, hey, what the hell are these guys doing?
Yeah.
And that's just.
It's all part of growing up as a
Yeah.
company, right? You have to deal with shit hitting the fan.
Same as dealing
yeah.
with competition, same as dealing with, you have to deal with it. It's not.
Your public face is something you have to manage as a company.
Yeah.
Right? You have to kind of make sure that you know how you put yourself across and stuff like that. But at the same time, just because, all right, there was an article about a year and a half ago where somebody, I think it was a Huffington Post or BuzzFeed or something like that, and they were just like, podcasts in India will never work. And
Okay.
I'm just like, I'm reading that. As I'm reading that, I'm just like, hey, you're full of shit. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. But I'm just like, you know what? The fact that somebody's putting out a hit piece about podcasts means that there is some this about it, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, fine, it's good. But you can't, I could have
Take
found out who
everything.
that person was. I could have called them. But
Yeah.
what's the point of doing all that?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem like a good use of time or a good use of your mental energy either, right? You just have to let this stuff roll off your back. I think if you're a founder, you can't get this is one out of 60 articles
But-
that'll come out
Yeah.
about you.
I want to ask you, you've also spent a lot of time in the Valley, you've met founders there,
Yeah.
you keep seeing and contrasting that ecosystem with
Yeah.
ours. How is it any better or different there?
It's different, I would say. I don't know if it's better or worse. But, when I meet people like Chamath, and, this is the second time I interviewed him, they are just more open, I guess, about saying what things are wrong, what are the things that are wrong, what are the things that are right. I think they're just more no holds barred,
They're
and
stronger on their opinions.
yeah,
isn't it?
and I think maybe it's not a good comparison because they've been doing this for a really long time,
Right.
And I think there is a lot of insecurity even there, but there are a lot of people who just come out and say this is not right, and here I don't see much of that
Yeah.
happening because that sort of coherence and in thought is not there, or people just don't want to put it out in black and white because, like I said, very simple things like saying which particular company do you pick as your best bet, they don't want to do it because they feel that others will be offended.
Wow.
So I think maturity levels are still low, and I think that reflects in every, I would say it's even true for the media. And we've been talking about this, about the funding stories and stuff. I feel we are still very, very nascent in terms of the ecosystem, and you have to jump through a lot of hoops to sort of get to where the Valley is. So I don't think it's a good comparable. But yeah, I think they are more sort of open, and they are not as politically right all the time as compared to how it is in India.
Yeah, and it stems from, you mentioned, it's not necessarily insecurity, but it stems from a little bit of confidence in oneself and
Exactly.
the sector as a whole.
Yeah.
I think here people are always worried, oh, I'll step on someone's toes, or I'll not get an opportunity, I'll miss out. something will
But,
happen.
yeah, and also, I mean, look at the amount of investors that they have there vis-a-vis here, right? You are tapping into like 5 or 6, funds here, and you have like hundreds there.
Yeah.
So I you don't need to be brash, but you can speak your mind. I think that's something that I would want more, in India as compared to the Valley, and more of thought leadership. Not the ones where you just kind of copy pasting from what you've heard, but like genuine, out of the box kind of thing. I don't get too much of that here.
More conversations like this.
Yeah. And, just the whole information economy around startups or ecosystem around startups and broader tech.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of still missing here. People on the fringes are the ones who are kind of the ones talking on Twitter, and they become like these talking heads and armchair, they're some big, gyan giver. And I'm like, dude, you've not even done anything. Like, I don't want to take names, but we all know, right? So that's the big problem in India. And you compare that to the Valley, where actually Chamath is very, very brash, very voluble. Like, he has an opinion on everything. But he took Facebook from, being X million users to what, he really pulled it for Facebook in terms of user growth. And I mean, he has like very solid credentials. So I'm going to listen to him, even if, a lot of times he's not making sense. But he has an opinion backed by having done something.
Right.
I don't see that in India. Like, most people who have done something are either quiet, don't want to say anything, or toe the line. They will never say anything.
Be
Which
outspoken. Yeah,
so that's a problem.
True. But I think that's just honestly, I think that's an Indian cultural thing, right? Even if you look at like our other business leaders, right? Not just
True.
the
Tech
tech stuff, right? I mean, like, you'll never hear like any kind of opinion from any of them.
But this is supposed to be the disruptor, right? So I would expect,
Tech folks to
not be like the old guard of like, India Inc. or corporate India. I mean, you would want them to have opinions
In
and
fact,
talk about
American old guard is the same way.
No, American old guard, you have people who do kind of put out there.
Not so
I mean,
much.
like, you have role models.
Yeah,
right?
not so much, but I mean,
you get role models. You have your Warren Buffetts of the world. You have your Charles Schwabs of the world.
Yes.
These guys are role models, right? In some way, for other people, say that, hey, I want to be like that, as opposed to being like a JP Morgan who doesn't say anything, right? I mean, like, so you kind of have that
few contrarian viewpoints.
And that kind of, I think, helps with that. Whereas over here, what businessman says anything except for maybe Mohandas Pai, right? Other than that, I don't know anybody who.
But
has,
he has his
But he has his own. Dude,
yeah, he's
Mohandas
like,
Pai has been saying some weird stuff.
So I think on this entire Me Too and stuff, we just didn't hear anything from people who really matter.
Yeah.
It maybe came from like the fringes or people who are not really, doing something very, I don't want to say that, they are doing smaller stuff, but I'm saying the mainstream and
people who could have made a massive impact.
Yeah, and, who are impactful and things like that, just didn't hear anything from them.
Yeah.
So I think that is something which needs like a lot of work, and, just generally, I think people should just come out and sort of talk about all of these issues far more, and we should hear it from the key players, Not from people who haven't done anything and spend all their time on Twitter and have an opinion,
But interesting point which you brought up about Me Too, right? How that also started in the Valley.
Yeah.
It didn't translate into as big a wave as it could have here.
Nothing, yeah.
But again, what's the reality of our situation here as well? Like, I was going to ask you about women in tech and, women entrepreneurs and so on.
Sure, yeah.
What is the reality here you see? And as a woman in tech yourself, what do you see around you? How is it going to get any better? What are the roadblocks?
hardly see any women around me.
Exactly.
Exactly. So I wish, I had a few more women I was, interviewing or generally chatting with. It's 95% of the times, men that you're meeting at all levels, and especially more so at the top rung, right? Because it's hardly there. And I mean, funds, let's not even get into that. I mean, that's that's true in the Valley as well. So just not there. They're kind of I'm sure
But
from
there are a lot
whatever.
of otherwise, I think, women finance business leaders.
There are a few, but I wouldn't
There
say
are
that-
banks are like dominated by women.
So much, but then why not funds? I mean, it's funny.
So
Never thought of it.
I think I don't think that there are enough and more people, as in women, in even the mid-rung to sort of, for them to scale up and go on to the, sort of top management level. And I think it's just, it starts from maybe the IITs. I mean, if you look at the representation of women there, it's hardly anything.
Yeah.
So it kind of just translates into, where do you, I mean, that's what companies say, that, we don't, when we go to campuses and when we're hiring, we don't see any, too many women there.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, hardly any. So the ones who are there obviously get picked up, and that's about it. So it just kind of, that's where the funnel, So, and that is true for even if you go to an IIM.
Right.
But I think tech folks obviously go to the IITs more, and that's where they see that, the abysmal number of, the women
so that's
representation.
Where the chances of someone going up to a leadership position already crashes. But it's alarming. I mean, it's not alarming, but it's a little sad to note that more and more women aren't trying out entrepreneurship themselves also, right? Beyond just being from an IIT or something like that.
No, I think a lot of this happens also because the skew of is it's very skewed towards covering a certain kind of companies where you don't have too many women. Mm-hmm. But if you go into the content space and you go into other fashion and lifestyle, you do find women entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
But they are not typically the ones which are going to be unicorns. So there is a certain bias that even in terms of coverage, right? I mean, it's not a bias. I would think you have to do some filtration. Right. And again, I'm always asked, so you don't you won't cover this company, no, because this is not like raised this much of money. I said no, that's not how we pick and choose, but it is a way of, I mean, we don't have unlimited space to write about everyone,
right?
So
it's not your job. Your job is to do a good job of choosing the right stories.
Yeah. So I think women are there as entrepreneurs, but they are not in this, consumer internet and, those typical food tech and even enterprise. I don't know if there are too many women. So I think it also is, it looks very lopsided because of the kind of coverage, which is more leaning towards these kind of sectors in internet and tech.
Right. And that's the reason for, I mean, it's a cycle, right? It's one and the other. Someone has to sort of break that and, emerge out of this.
Yeah, and so like I was telling you before getting in, that, it was such a struggle, even for, we were doing a page for the year end to get a woman in there. And, you want women, you want but how do you choose when, the options are so limited, Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know how to resolve that issue, but you need more women to be, part of at least the leadership, team, so that you're interacting and getting their points of view as well.
I think that's important, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what were the idea that, I mean, it's a different perspective and it's a different way of thinking. And
yes.
The fact that most companies are not looking at that, I think is actually kind of extremely harmful for them in the wrong run as well. So, I mean, just from a pure practical perspective, it doesn't make sense what they're doing here.
Yeah.
Wow. But on that note, before we wrap up, I do want to get a few bits from you about what you're looking forward to in 2018.
Yeah, will you tell us what's the most exciting for 2017?
Okay.
Yeah.
So 2017, I think for me, it was such a SoftBank year.
Okay.
And,
pretty much.
I think it kind of just ruled global tech. So in terms of how, and I wrote a piece on how it sort of realigned and reordered the whole ecosystem. There'll be more of that actually playing out in 2018.
Yeah, they have too much money.
Yeah. And more than money, after putting money in Uber, basically they have a stake in every transportation startup now around the world. So I think there'll be a lot of readjustment and realignment in the big spaces, and SoftBank only does, really they would put money in market leaders.
Right.
So, they are very different from what they used to do in 2014, again, something which I had mentioned in my story. So I think that will keep playing out in 2018. I mean, there's no stopping them. I think there's a lot of focus to kind of cover other sort of companies and sectors as well. I would think everyone now, no, there's not a fatigue, but there is Amazon and Flipkart, and they will keep fighting. That's not ending anytime soon. But a lot of new stuff like local languages, crypto. Oh my God, yeah. A lot of stuff happening in the financial services space as well. So we all are trying to find those other pockets which are not sort of overdone, and people are like, oh, another story, So I think that's the attempt, to find new spaces. I don't want to get into the whole theme, what is a hot theme, because that's very VC like, I don't want to do that. Theme tracking. But I think we should be hopefully like doing more deeper and sort of analytical stories, even if it is in one of these
I think
sectors.
we're seeing that. We are seeing a lot of independent media also,
right, and I hope
startups.
People also are supportive of it, because that's something we were talking about, right? When you do deeper stuff, then actually there are more chances that you're upsetting people. When you're just doing a fundraise, okay, this much has been raised and this one has led the round, and that's it.
That's press release, basically.
Yeah, exactly. That's a canned releases, right? But when you start going deeper into companies, you will unearth stuff which will not be very,
which they won't like.
Yeah, which may not be positive. So what I would expect is that people who complain so much and are like, oh, but everyone's just writing the same stuff, give the media the chance to kind of write those deeper and more analytical and have an opinion, and don't get offended, so that you can truly have independent journalism. So I hope that happens and it sort of unfolds, and we're all sort of happy with the content that comes out of this space.
Do you think things like the Ken and stuff like that, do they have an ability to get deeper into things than a free newspaper or a newspaper which is more ad supported rather than subscription supported?
I think they're interesting models. I don't want to comment on one specific publication, but I think it does give you and I don't know if we touched upon this point, the whole funding obsession, writing about funding news and all of that. I think the Valley also went through it, and it all sort of started to become deeper and sort of more not only chasing those kind of stories. In 2013-14, it took them, many years for an information and for a recode to happen. Before that, everyone was reporting in Wall Street Journal, everyone who got out. So I think we can't expect in 3 years the media to suddenly skip like many steps and come to a point where you're just doing these, and you have to go through the motions. So I think TechCrunch is still there to report on funding and everything. So there will be that in India, and there will be other sort of publications as well, which will be more, they will be doing deeper stories, more analytical, and they will pick on fewer things to do.
Right.
Because they will have the space to do it, and they will not be pressured into doing like the 20th version of another story. But as a newspaper, you can't afford to do that. Like Wall Street Journal still has to do, because
you have to do the news.
Yeah, you have. I, as a journalist, have to think that my reader is subscribing to my paper may not know. Like we have to go in thinking that. I can't be like assuming that you know that Flipkart raised 1 billion in 2014.
Right.
I still have to go with the assumption that it is not, and then I write my story. Right. So I think it's different. That platform allows you to be a little more niche and kind of cater to a very targeted audience.
Right.
A newspaper cannot do that because we are going to millions of people. So you have you're
fair. Makes sense.
Yeah, but there's definitely space for that, and I hope there are many more. Yeah.
Absolutely. Great. On that note, I think this was a great episode. Thanks so much for doing this.
I know. Finally, we did it. Huh?
I know.
Good start to the year.
Exactly.
Yeah, to many more podcasts.
Yes.
All right. So,
thank you.
Where can people reach out to you on Twitter?
Yeah. So my handle is Samidha S. Yeah, so that's my Twitter handle, and it has all my details of email, etc. So anyone with any tips, please mail me.
And not fund release press releases.
Yes, I get I crib so much about PR people bombarding us with like PR releases. Yeah, so anyway, they know.
You know.
Yeah.
All right, superb. So,
and just please a reminder to subscribe to the Slack channel. Please go to the website ivmpodcast.com/Shunya One. Over there, you'll find a button saying subscribe to Slack. Press that button, send us your email address, we'll send you an invite. And also please do 5-star reviews on iTunes. Those are important and those help a lot.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys, and we'll talk to you next week.
He bends down to test the warm water for his bath. He comes here to quench his thirst for a hot shower and some podcasts. You can witness how he enjoys having other people talk about cool stuff in his bathroom. Indeed, it helps him with his loneliness. You can find more of his species on ivmpodcast.com, your one-stop destination where you can check out the coolest Indian podcasts. Happy listening.